Welcome. If you're a woman who has a sense that there's more out there for you, you're in the right place. I'm Whitney Baker, host of the Electric Ideas podcast. Somewhere along the line of work and kids, life carried on, but I lost track of my truth. I'm on a reflective journey, and that's what this podcast is all about. Each week, I interview a woman who is lighting her own path and offering others hope. Before our conversation ends, we'll share a reflective question for you to explore. Sometimes all we need is a jolt, a fresh idea, an aha moment that connects us to a sense of possibility. This, my friends, is what I call an electric idea. Welcome back to Electric Ideas. Today's guest is Jennifer Main. We are going to discuss her book called The Space Between: Creating Conscious Boundaries for Deep Connection and Authentic Alignment. So this book and conversation is all about setting boundaries so that you can have more meaningful connections with people in your life while also staying true to yourself. I love Jennifer's fresh perspective on boundaries because setting boundaries, and in this case, learning to say yes or no in a way that is full of compassion, is a life skill that I really think helps women achieve that elusive sense of freedom that I know we all crave. Before we hop into this conversation, I want to let you know that the interest list is open for Season to Shift, my signature 6-week mastermind for moms who are ready to get off of autopilot and live life on purpose instead of default. Season to Shift starts on September 25th. It's a small group coaching experience for 6 moms who are ready to step into the next best version of themselves. So each week during the program on Wednesdays, I guide the group through a bespoke combination of teachings, meditation, personal writing, and opportunities to be in community and connect and share with each other, all in a way that really gives you a chance to press pause on the outside world and get clear on what you're craving during this season of life and what brings you a true sense of joy and purpose. And if this sounds pretty deep, it is. But my secret sauce as a teacher and facilitator for Electric Ideas is that I balance deep introspection, something many moms feel like they never have time for. They never have time to actually slow down and reflect on their life and make sure their actions are adding up to days and years they actually want to live. But I approach this work with a sense of fun and lightness and curiosity and play, including through weekly practices and homework assignments that you'll actually enjoy doing because they're energizing and they flow really easily into your regular day. Doors to officially enroll in Season to Shift will open in the coming weeks, but this time around, I wanted to create an interest list just because I recognize this is a busy couple of weeks for women, and sometimes we need a little bit more headway to get the dates on our calendar and make a decision. So if you sign up for the interest list, this is what it means. You'll get a quick note with the dates so you can look at them in advance with plenty of time to see if the program is a fit for your schedule. Secondly, it's a way of holding your spot. This is an intentionally intimate group, usually of about 6 women, and it will fill up. So when the doors officially open in the coming weeks for Season to Shift, I'll reach out to anybody on the interest list first. Make sure you have all the information you need to make a decision about the program, answer any questions you might have about the program, and give you the first chance to enroll before I open up the program beyond the Electric Ideas community. If you have any questions about Season to Shift, you can always message me on Instagram at @WhitneyWoman or drop me an email at whitney@myelectricideas.com. Okay, let's get into this conversation with Jennifer Main. Jennifer, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
You say that when we learn how to set boundaries, we stop fighting others and ourselves. So let's start there. Can you explain how setting boundaries can help us bridge to a deeper sense of both inner peace and a deeper sense of relationship with others?
Yes. So the way I define a boundary is it's a choice. The boundaries that we have in our lives are just simply the choices that we make every day. And the choices that, whatever it is that we're choosing is what creates the quality of life that we have. It creates the quality of the time that we spend and the quality of the relationships that we have with others, how well we're communicating, how well we're expressing ourselves, what we're picking up on deeper levels intuitively, kind of on an unconscious level as well. And I think some of my biggest lessons over the years, some of them harder than others, have really been in relationship to other people, and really how my own lack of healthy boundaries or healthy awareness around how I was reacting or responding in a situation, or how I was presenting myself or leaning in or not, was really having a massive impact on the health of the relationship, but also, the two of us, whoever I was connecting with at that time. And I know my history is one that I tended to be someone who's a bit more passive, who would kind of sit and watch and take things in, and probably overly passive in a lot of ways, and probably tending into a little bit of either people pleasing or just trying to wait and see, waiting to gauge what was going to happen. A lot of unhealthy responses, really. And what I started to recognize was the way that that impacted on other people, and how they then felt that they had to react in a certain way, or had to step in. And I don't know, just again, that unconscious reactions that we all take part in day to day throughout our lives. So when I started to recognize that, okay, if I show up this way, or if I'm not being fully honest or authentic, or if I'm hiding aspects of myself, it really means that another person's not able to meet me fully either as themselves. So we end up just kind of playing parts, playing real roles, reacting off of each other, instead of just being able to show up aligned and healthy and the way that we actually want to be. So, it's really been a process for me of understanding and just being more conscious and aware of how I might be reacting to others, how they might be reacting to me, and just getting more clarity on, well, how do I actually want to show up here? And if I can show up more authentically, it gives the other person permission to, and it creates so much health and care and love and healing between two people that I never would have had before.
You mentioned people pleasing, and since you brought it up as an experience you've gone through, there was something subtle that came through to me in your book about people pleasing. Because usually when I've talked about it on the show or thought about it in general, there's almost this want to shift, like, oh, you're not standing up for yourself. You're not, standing up for your values or showing up for yourself. A subtle point you made in the book that I found really compelling is that people pleasers sometimes are, oh, go with the flow, but it almost can become a burden for the person that you're in relationship with. Tell us about that.
Yes, I still remember this moment that I had a conversation. It was the one I worked with, actually. And yeah, again, kind of that thing where I'd probably been a bit overly passive, or not a bit, a lot overly passive with a lot of things in my life. And it was always when I just either felt like I didn't know the right choice to take, I felt scared to take that choice. I just wasn't sure about what the next thing to do was. And so in that indecision, in my mind, I kind of rationalize it as, oh, I'm being easygoing. If I don't care, then it means if somebody else does, then they can choose. So even things like, are we going to go to lunch somewhere? What are we going to do? I would kind of say, I don't care, whatever, whatever. And one of my friends that I was speaking to at my work, she basically said, she's like, I'm so tired of people doing that, because then I feel like I have to choose everything, and I don't want to choose anymore. And I don't want to be responsible for everybody. And it really was that light bulb moment of, oh, I'm trying to make somebody else be responsible for me. I'm trying to get them to choose a path for me. Even, it's sometimes as small as choosing lunch. I mean, you can scale it out and see how that was really my pattern in lots of other areas as well. If I don't know what to do, I'll default to what somebody else has done, or what I think might maybe work, instead of really going deeper in, tapping into my own intuition and getting clearer on what would probably serve me in a better way. So I think I probably delayed a lot of things. I hem and hawed and went back and forth with a lot of things. Probably wasted a lot of energy worrying and stressing about things, and or just kind of opting out and going, well, I'm just not going to choose. And as we know, life will just carry on, and things kind of get chosen for you in roundabout ways. And it's usually, it can often be to your detriment.
I want to share a quote from your book that's relevant to what we're talking about now. You say, we often associate creating a boundary with people who are a little parasitical, who suck us dry, with those we judge to be threatening, or those we simply do not trust. I think that you're opening up this conversation about boundaries and just the thinking about boundaries in a different way. What more can you tell us about the big picture of boundaries And how do you define conscious boundary setting as a little bit different than maybe people have classically thought about boundaries?
So what you see online a lot and what people talk about a lot when setting boundaries is they often come at it from this place of either they're afraid it's going to be a conflict, they think it's going to be a fight, they think that they have to fight their way into having a boundary. So it's often charged with a lot of fear or anger or frustration, and often things from the past that have, that are they're trying to resolve or rectify or understand in some way. And really, in terms of setting boundaries, for me, it's really just getting clear on how you want to be treated and how you want to treat other people. And that also goes for what you want your relationship to be with the world around you. So that can be the people in your life. It could also be your relationship with money. It can be your relationship with your body. It can be your relationship with your home, with nature. Everything is relational. So you can really apply this to anything and everything. But I think if you're looking at it in terms of I'm setting a boundary because I want to protect myself or because I'm afraid of the world, I'm afraid of other people, I'm afraid of being taken advantage of, I'm afraid of being hurt, then that is what creates a barrier instead of a boundary. And barriers are hard and fixed. They don't wiggle well, they don't work well. Some people for a while may feel more comfortable because if they don't know how to set a boundary, they think a barrier is a better option. But what happens is when we build walls, when we build barriers, we shut things out. And so we don't try new things. We don't open ourselves to new experiences. We don't allow ourselves to be vulnerable, which is what relationships require is vulnerability and the ability to, evolve and grow. And so if we can start to recognize the difference between those two and start to kind of question that, well, what could be a healthy boundary here? And what do I want my boundaries to be based in? For me, things like honor, respect, compassion, these are the words that come up over and over again, kind of the quality of the relationships that I want to have with anything and everything. So I think when you start to, again, recognize how you're treating yourself, how you're treating other people, and are you engaging in dialogue, activities, actions, energy exchanges, whatever that is, in ways that facilitate that and that are based in that, that's when you can really start to move into really healthy, exchanges or communication as opposed to putting up a bunch of walls and trying to push people out.
Yeah, I had a tiny feeling of sadness at some point during your book when I was thinking about women putting up what you're saying, barriers, because I feel like one of the most satisfying parts of existence is having deep, authentic relationships. And when we have walls and we're not willing to be vulnerable and share, we're really doing a disservice to ourselves. And gosh, to go through life and not have that openness to connection feels like you could be missing out on something.
100%. And I find this so fascinating. And I can, again, recognize this in myself in the past of, a deep desire to connect, to belong, to share experiences, to, laugh with people, to enjoy each other's company. But anytime you are creating these barriers and are pushing people away, you're creating the separation that you don't want. So it may feel, quote unquote, safer on some level, but it's actually separating you from the things that you want. And so it not only separates you from the people that you want to connect with and the experiences you want to connect with, it also separates you from yourself. And yeah, so the more that you, again, that kind of pushing those walls, all of those things actually take away the things that you're trying to cultivate and create. So you undo all the good things you put in.
I really also enjoyed in your book, you had a metaphor of walking across a frozen pond or a very old suspended bridge to kind of describe, this was my take, to describe how we naturally test people's boundaries when it's people we love. Can you elaborate on this scenario and how it relates to, human nature of pressing boundaries in close relations?
Yes. So we all do this to a degree, unconsciously or consciously. We're always trying to see on some level what we can kind of get away with, where we might be able to sway things our way, where we may be able to get what we feel like we need or what we want. Sometimes that's from places of old wounding, from trauma or pain from the past. And obviously that's when it's very unhealthy. And some people just don't grow up with an example of good boundaries. If you didn't have parents who knew how to set them, if you weren't in schools or cultures where, boundaries were healthy, then it's something that a lot of us are learning as adults to figure out. But this unconscious testing, some of again, it's either to get your needs met. Sometimes it's testing the other person to see how far can I go before you'll reject me? How far can I go before you say stop? How far will you go before you actually kind of stand up and say, no, this isn't healthy. Let's create something different. And so what happens is that people spend oftentimes years just kind of going back and forth, kind of pushing and pulling at each other, again, trying to get needs met, but neither person ends up happy in that scenario. Neither person ends up in a relationship that they actually feel fulfilled and upright and have integrity in. Yeah, so I think it's always interesting to kind of look back at your relationships, or if you're in a relationship now and you can kind of start to spot the patterns of go, oh, okay, this is where I was kind of pushing here. This is where I was testing here. And then start to ask the questions, what is it I'm really trying to gain from that? It's not that I'm trying to be rude or disrespectful to that person. It's not that I'm trying to hurt them. There's a part of me that's acting out because I feel like I am missing something or I need something from them. And so kind of getting a sense of what that is and recognizing, okay, actually, could I cultivate that or gain that in a different way?
For me, this is bringing up just the whole idea that self-awareness is kind of a critical first step to creating boundaries, being aware of our own needs and values and limits. If you're working with women and maybe they are like, yes, I need boundaries in my life. I mean, I feel like that's usually the tone. Perhaps somebody might listen to this conversation and want to approach it in a different way. How would you start with that self-awareness piece in terms of just tuning into yourself so that you can have that first step to creating conscious boundaries?
So I think, even though we often talk about it again in a relational sense of kind of my relationship with this or this other person, if you can bring it back to you and spend some time, whether you call that meditation, contemplation, prayer, whatever that is for you. But the question to ask for me to start with is, what is creating the most suffering in my life right now? What's creating the most difficulty, the most drama, the most pain? And I would say start with that, because if you can really get a handle or an idea around one thing, it starts to affect other aspects too. So oftentimes we think that, the subconscious mind, that all these behaviors are really complex and difficult, and it's just going to be so hard to work it out. Usually it's kind of one or two things going on, actually. So even though there might be lots of different relationships that are struggling or suffering, if it's based in your shame, if it's based in, old anger, if it's based in whatever that is, again, getting into the root of that can help you start to kind of pick that apart and resolve that and witness the changes that has. Something I really like to do, which I kind of touched on before, is this notion of really getting clear on the qualities that you want to either feel or experience or have in your life. So instead of getting set on, I have to have a person speak to me in this tone, or they have to treat me in this way, or they have to fulfill this need for me in this specific way, which is really fixed and confined. Again, it's kind of going back to, what are the qualities, the virtues, the things that are really important to me? So again, if you're starting off with, what does respect mean for me? What is it like for me to respect myself? What is it like for me to respect my own time, my own energy, my own space? What does honor look like for me? I mean, if I really honored the gifts within me, would I share them more? If I really honored, my family members, how would I speak to them differently? And everybody is going to be a little bit different, because some people really value things like adventure. Some people really value more like peace and calm. Some of this is going to be a bit about figuring out what really resonates and works for you. But if you can start to get really clear on that and what that feels like, and then asking the question, how do I start to introduce this into the facets of my life? How do I start to introduce this into the way I express myself, into the way I hold myself, into the way that I see the world? Because the idea is that if your energy changes with this, if your intentions change with this, if your awareness shifts, then that starts to ripple out into everything else. And so we get really caught up in, oh, it's all about all these other people. It's all about all these things I'm kind of projecting all these ideas onto. When actually, if you can bring it back to, okay, what am I creating within this? What is it that I'm coming with that has either been unconscious or I just haven't known how to deal with, how to cope with, which again, we grow up often not knowing a lot of these things. We just don't have the understanding of it. So a lot of this is just learning and understand, giving yourself a break as you're learning, and allowing yourself to kind of play and practice with it. Cause I've written this book on it. I've worked with clients all the time on this stuff. I'm still learning about it and I still recognize, oh, there's a blind spot. Oh, I missed that little bit there. So really allowing yourself to, yeah, cut yourself some slack and know that it's a process and it's something that can evolve and improve over time, I think is a great way to approach it too.
That feels really empowering to me because it's almost like, what am I looking to bring to life versus how am I looking to box myself off?
And that is, I like that phrasing. How do I bring it to life? Because it really has to be alive and living in you. There's a difference between knowing and understanding. And we might feel like we know what we want, but if we haven't embodied it and if it's not a living, breathing part of us, then it's not really going to have an impact. It's not really going to make a difference. And so the more you can kind of recognize, this is where kind of your feelings or your intuition can guide you of what feels really good, like what feels amazing, what feels expansive, what lights you up, what feels nourishing and nurturing, following those things and not dismissing it, which is what we often tend to do. And saying, actually, no, the way I feel is the most important. It's what drives everything. We're all just trying to feel better. And so if you can kind of recognize, well, how do I actually want to feel? And are there ways I can follow that, cultivate it, live it, speak it into being? Then that's going to make it much more alive and fruitful for everyone.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the part of your book where you talked about anger and how uncomfortable anger is from an emotion perspective. And I'm curious just to bridge this a little bit because I know that there's a lot of intentional women listening to this podcast who are self-aware. And I also know that every single person probably has one person in their life who is a teacher. And I found sometimes I have to challenge myself to go into situations where I know I'm going to have somebody who rubs me, who's teaching me. And from your perspective with setting conscious boundaries, I'm wondering if you have any suggestions for how we navigate interactions with people who we perceive as being tricky for us.
Yeah, I love this. It's so frustrating and so wonderful when you're in it. Yes. So, what I've recognized over and over again is that if there's a person in our life that triggers something within us, whether that's anger, frustration, sadness, rage, resentment, whatever those deep, heavy emotions are, there's something within us that is judging them. And I had this really great realization a number of years ago. I was in a course and there I met a guy that of course was partnered up with him the first day and I could not wait to get away. I had all these judgments of he doesn't listen, he doesn't understand me, he's condescending, he's rude, had all these judgments. And so I went away that night and sat down and sat with it. And I realized that all the things I was judging about him were just my judgments. He has friends and family that love him. It was just my stuff. And a lot of the things that I was judging about him are actually things that I had judged about myself. I grew up in the South where you're polite and you're kind and you really respect people and, you go out of your way, sometimes to your detriment, to help others and to be present. And I realized I had a belief that if I allowed myself to like him or if I cut him some slack, I would be rude too. And that would make me a bad person. So all this was hinged in me trying to be a better person. I was judging him to try to make myself a better person,
Hmm.
which is how the subconscious, the unconscious mind works. It has these really interesting ways of reasoning things out. And so once I understood that, I was just able to see him in this whole new light. And something else that I found that works for me, and it may work for you or some of the listeners, is another time I had an event I was at, and there was a woman who was, again, my judgments of that I just didn't like the way she was behaving. She's being really immature. Thought she was pulling a bunch of attention. She was distracting people, all these things. And I just had this moment where I just kind of closed my eyes and I just said, let me see her from a soul perspective, or let me see her as a soul. all of that judgment just vanished. Because if we can remember that, we are more than our humanness, we're more than our egos, we're more than our unhealthy habits and patterns, we're more than our trauma and pain. If you can start to remember that and kind of see people in that way, then it helps you to get out of that. Now, I'm not saying that it's easy to do that every moment of every day, because you'll have moments where you'll kind of go unconscious, you'll forget, you'll get caught up in the drama. But anytime you can remember that and come back to that and take these moments where you are feeling triggered or angry or frustrated and saying, okay, what is this igniting within me? What's this activating within me? And is there something I can address so that I can be around that person and not be so annoyed or be so frustrated when I'm there? Because again,
Mhm.
all these people have friends and family that love them. It's just our own beliefs, our own perspectives that are getting in the way of that.
Yeah. I've never really vocalized this, but something that's helped me is, especially if it's somebody I've known for a long time, to try to, like you're saying, take that compassionate lens when I can. We're not, we're all human,
Yeah.
we're all practicing, but just almost looking at them as a child that's hurting and thinking compassionately about if they're acting in a certain way that maybe I'm judging, maybe I'm trying not to judge, but that they're suffering. And it just really kind of allows me to shift a little bit out of that feeling of judgment into oneness and compassion. Not every time, but it's helped me.
That's perfect. And I think anytime, and it can go the same for you, if you start to recognize, or if I recognize that I'm acting out of alignment, if I'm getting caught up in a moment and kind of going, this isn't really me. Why am I acting this way? Why did I respond in that way? It's exactly the same thing as, what part of me is trying to get a need met? What part of me needs some more love, some care, some understanding? Absolutely.
I love turning that light on yourself too. Thank you for adding that. I know one thing that comes up a lot, especially since I'm working communities of women, is the idea of empathetic senses and women being extra sensitive, sometimes being labeled or sometimes wanting to identify as being highly sensitive, but almost feeling like that can be to their detriment. And I think that you have some fresh perspective on sensitivity as a gift.
Yeah.
Can you share that with us?
Yeah, so I really do believe that sensitivity is a superpower. And I say that as someone who grew up being very sensitive and suffering within that, because I didn't understand it. My family didn't understand it. There wasn't a lot of language or talking about things like that. I know for myself, it caused me to kind of retreat, withdraw in. I became more of an observer. It just felt difficult to be around people because I could pick up on so much of what they were feeling or what was going on with them. And I know for a lot of people who are highly sensitive, it is this feeling of what is me and what is not me. And can we turn down the dial on all the color, the light, the sound, the feeling, the smells, all of this stuff, because it can feel like it's too much. So a lot of my own kind of process and work over the years has been learning how to be in and amongst all of it, everything, without feeling like it's overwhelming or like it's too much for me. And what happens with that is instead of contracting and hiding away or isolating yourself, again, a lot of the things we were talking about before, it's kind of saying, how do I expand into it? And instead of trying to fight against the world, instead of trying to fight against everything that's going on around me, how can I be present in it? How can I go with it? How can I allow it to enhance my experience? I love being in live music festivals, things like that, where there's lots of people, lots of sound, lots of noise. And, again, before that would have been too much. I would have been exhausted by that. It would have been too much for me. But when you can expand into that and you can play with the energy that's present, that's there, because, we amplify each other, we can create a great vibe. That's why we go to concerts. That's why we go to live shows. If you can embrace that and allow that to be a part of your life, then it actually heightens your experience. So instead of feeling like there's too much light or flavor or sound, you can really go into it and find the nuances in it and recognize the layers of it and how when the layers play together, you can essentially develop your palate and you can feel really enriched and nourished by everything that is there around you. And again, I say this knowing that it's probably not something people are going to flip a switch and all of a sudden they go, oh, I can do this. This will be a practice. This will be something that they work towards and work within. But this has been some of the greatest healing in my life. It's given me the most insight, and it's totally changed the quality of my life by reframing and changing my relationship with my sensitivity. And yeah, again, instead of fighting it, embracing it and using it.
Surrendering to it. I know we're covering a lot of territory here, but you mentioned in what you were saying about being sensitive that we tend to amplify each other. And I know another common scenario that can be frequent. I don't mean to sound sexist, but I just feel like women have other women in their relationships who tend to unload. And I think healthy and being honest and candid about what's going on in our life is totally great. But sometimes I think women get put in these situations where someone is just complaining or talking negatively about other people. And in the book, you touched on something that resonated with me about how we almost have a choice. I'm paraphrasing here, but my takeaway is we almost have a choice to amplify what they're saying. And we almost choose to play a role in that if we don't consciously set a boundary. I think a lot of women really don't know what language to use when they're in these scenarios because it can be physically uncomfortable sometimes. And they want to feel like they're supportive and listening to their friend, but they also want to be true to themselves. So, can you give us maybe an example of this and how, if you were walking a client through navigating this, maybe some language choices or anything else that could be supportive?
Yeah. So there's a few kind of levels and layers that can go with this. But something that I found useful is if it feels like there's someone who's going into it where they're either just kind of dumping or they're gossiping, or it's the kind of unconscious, like they're obviously trying to do something with that information. They're trying to get some kind of need met, but they don't really know how to do that in a healthy way. Something that I do with people is just start to ask questions about, instead of digging deeper into the gossip and getting those details, it's kind of saying, well, what would you like to do with that information? Or what could you choose to change that situation? So it becomes an empowering experience for them to recognize that they can do something differently in that moment. Because oftentimes people, if they are kind of just dumping everything, it's because they feel like a victim, they feel disempowered, they feel like they can't do anything about it. And so, having some conversation and talking through, and it can be really gentle. It doesn't mean it's, if you try to say you should do this with it, that's not going to work. But if you can kind of say, okay, well, yeah, well, what could we do differently? Or what could we do here? Are there some ideas for how to move forward to help resolve some of this? Because then that kind of disrupts that energy of, oh, I just go dump all my stuff. I temporarily feel better, but then I go back into the same situation and it happens over and over and over again. So if you kind of disrupt the way that they're communicating in a kind and gentle way, it can shift their mind into a potential solution or way of seeing things differently, or going, oh, actually, am I playing a role in this? What could I do differently here? I found that to work over and over again. So it's just that simple disruption, that simple redirection is something that can really, yeah, shift the conversation. And I also find that, because before, what I would have done in those situations is just kind of sit back and be like, oh, okay, I'm just going to be sitting listening to this. And you kind of tune out, zone out, and you're not really present. And I really like to be present and engaged in my conversations. If I'm going to spend time with somebody, I want it to be enjoyable. So this is an opportunity for you to say, well, what kind of conversation do I want to be having? Like, what do I want to be talking about here? So instead of just feeling like you've got to be the passive listener, saying, okay, well, how can we create a conversation that's going to be more interesting? So it may be redirecting into something that, again, is more alive, that's healthier, that, I don't know, is something that's uplifting, or something you're curious about, something you want to explore. And again, it just kind of maybe shifts the mindset of that person into something that's more creative or more interesting or more alive as well. And I think the conversations are those relationship dynamics, especially if you've had that with a person for years and years, you may just kind of go, unconsciously going, oh, well, this is how it's going to be. It doesn't have to stay that way. So you have the ability to start to disrupt and change some things too.
I love so many things about that. I just want to reflect back to you that It kind of brings us full circle to when we were talking about this boundary setting. I almost want to say there's a lot of the conversations I see have this aggressive, almost masculine quality. And I think for women, this is making intuitive sense for me because usually women want to maintain a relationship or they maybe wouldn't be there to begin with, but just kind of gently redirecting things, I think could just stop a pattern and kind of stop that person from thinking of you as the person that you're going to go there with. And it doesn't have to be this big, like, I'm going to stop you there moment. So I appreciate that. We are coming up on time, but I want to ask you about one final thing because I did survey my audience a little bit and my listeners to get feedback. And I know they want to know about flow state. And I'm a creative person and I value flow state. You talk about the relationship between boundaries and flow state. So I just wanted to kind of end there with an opportunity to share any reflections on that.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, we could talk about this all day, but what I will say is there's absolutely a relationship between boundaries and flow. So if you think about the banks of a river, without the banks creating that channel of water to go through, the water would just be a stagnant pool. It would sit, there wouldn't be any movement, there wouldn't be any change, there wouldn't be any life there. So if you think about if you set boundaries for yourself with your time, with your energy, with your focus, with the way you communicate, if they are aligned enough, it moves you into flow states. And the more aligned you get, the easier it is for you to live in flow. So for people who are really scattered, who are overworked, underfed, really have a lot of these difficulties, which many of us do in modern life, where most people are doing far too much. If you can start to kind of cultivate your schedule, your practices, things like that, the things that are, again, nourishing, nurturing, like real self-care, not just drink a glass of wine, have a bubble bath. I mean, like real self-care, which means you meditate, real self-care, which is where you have some difficult conversations with some people that you might need to have. Real self-care, where you put some real food in your body, these things where you go to that yoga class, you carve out time to go do it. When you do those things, then the universe responds, whatever you want to call it, life will respond to you. And so instead of jumping all over the place, reacting to life, reacting to the next thing in the diary, reacting to the next thing that's pulling at your focus or pulling at your energy. And this can be Netflix, Instagram, this can be people in your world. Again, this can be anything and everything. When you start to set some clear boundaries with that, then you will move into a state of flow. And flow states are where we are most creative. There's more ease and there's more grace to it. We don't get distracted by the things that don't matter as much. So we're able to prioritize and really figure out what's going to serve us in the best ways. And I think just as a little tip to get people started is to look at your kind of daily and weekly practices, your schedules. And if you can find a daily practice to do and kind of a weekly, your day or half day a week that is dedicated to kind of active recovery, doing things that feel good, that nourish your soul, and nourish your body, and schedule that stuff in, like make it real. Don't just think about it, but actually do it. What happens is because we talk a lot about how we get conditioned over time. Well, we can program ourselves. So the more you start to regularly add these healthy practices into your life and make these healthy choices, you reprogram yourself for the goodness. You program yourself for health and gratitude and love and joy. But it takes commitment, like it takes a dedication to that. But do it in a way that's light and joyful, not another thing of, oh, I have to do this, but what do I actually want to do? When you start with that, it becomes easier and easier for you to move into those states. And really, that's how we all want to feel. That's all we're seeking. We're often, smoking, drinking, all the dopamine hits. We're doing that stuff to feel better because we are seeking flow. We're just going about it in ways that don't actually get us there.
I'm on board with all of that. I deeply agree with how you beautifully articulated that. So thank you. I always end my episodes with a chance for reflection. I know we've had a lot of opportunities throughout the conversation, but I'm wondering in the area of creating conscious boundaries with an intention to deepen not only our connection with others, but also to really know and honor ourselves. What's one question women could be asking themselves more?
Hopefully, this is going to be concise and clear enough. I really believe that everything we do in life, everything we experience, helps to answer the questions: who am I really and why am I here? Everything we experience shows us what aligns and what does not. Everything we do shows us what draws us forward or makes us go, oh, that's not for me. For somebody else, not for me. So I think any way that you can just be more in tune and more in present with how you are responding to life, with what feels like it's calling you forward. And maybe that's the question of what is calling me right now? What is calling me to deepen? What's calling me to expand? What's calling me to try something new? I think that is one of the best, isn't the right word, but it's a beautiful way to really consider and ponder and play with these ideas of awareness and awakening and yeah, who am I really? Yeah, so this is something I remind myself every once in a while, especially when things start to feel a little flat or off. I recognize I've gotten off track, and so that question of okay, well, what is calling me forward? What is calling me at the moment? It is gets always gets me back there. Mhm.
Beautiful. I know my community will want to learn more after this amazing conversation. So, Jennifer, where can we find you? Where can we support you and learn more?
Yeah, so my website is withjennifer.com, and on most of the social media platforms, I'm at with Jennifer 44. I've got lots of free videos on YouTube, lots of resources and information. But yeah, would be happy to answer any questions or connect with anyone. And yeah, thank you all so much for allowing me to be a part of this community.
Well, it's been a delight having you. Thank you for your time. I'm so glad you joined me today. If you're looking for more, feel free to connect with me on Instagram at @WhitneyWoman. And if you enjoyed the show, I invite you to support me by leaving a review or sharing it with a friend. Hope you have an inspired day.